I wish, first of all, to thank the organizers of this event and of the plenary, of course, President Sister Helen and Professor Fabio Ferrucci for their excellent work. Now, the title of my presentation, Treating Fragility with Social Relations, is clearly referred to my more general theory of society as a relational fact. We do not live in a society, in a collectivity, which is a kind of thing. We live in relation to other people. So many people this morning have already referred to the novelty of what was called the relational ontology or metaphysics in treating disabled people. Now, I will dig on it in order to go beyond the medical model in dealing with disability. I think that we are still in a kind of functionalist framework to deal with disability and fragility, while we need a different approach, really, to change our mind. Now, the essence of caring for frail and disabled people consists in a certain relationality that is in giving and receiving a certain relationship. The relationship as such, as an entity outside the people involved, is the protagonist of care. In the relationship, all human dimensions are present, the physical, the psychological, the spiritual ones. The material help, of course, is important. The material help that is given to those in need is certainly important and often decisive for the fate of people, but taking care of the other consists in the specific qualities and causal properties of the relationship established with the person. It is the relationship that gives meaning and quality to care, because all requests in conditions of need are requests for embodied relationships. The material help to disabled people takes on meaning from the relationship between the caregiver and the care receiver. It is a life word that is intersubjective relationship. What is lacking in today's society is not so much material and technological resources, of course, with many differences between countries, but in general, what is lacking is the relational skills of welcoming, supporting, and socially integrating people in difficulty. The care of the other is increasingly entrusted to new technologies, material resources, impersonal welfare mechanisms, while interpersonal social relationships become increasingly weak, liquid, unavailable. The consequences are evident in the loss of social solidarity and in the degradation of the human condition, even where resources are present. Situations of need due to fragility, hardship, disability, and marginalization are spreading. Disabilities in the strict sense, as we know, make up about 16% of the world population, but the frailties due to some handicap are at least 3 times as much. We need a social change, first of all, cultural, which brings out, rather than concealing, the relational character of human needs, and at the same time of the necessary response, which is realized only in the gift between caregivers and care receivers. That is, in the creation of what I call the relational good between them, between the caregiver and the care receiver, which is the precondition of good care. Good care cannot be exerted really if there is no relational good between the caregiver and the care receiver. We still have a long way to go to understand what it means to say that caring for the other lies in the qualities and causal properties of human social relationships. It is necessary to make all the components of caring relational. That is, to make relational people's behavior, to make relational the organization of the service, and the social context that can favor or inhibit care as a relational good. Caring for the other person, giving meaning to the interpersonal relations, implies giving meaning to the interpersonal relationship with the other in order to respond to the ultimate value of life. And yet, this sense is formed and regenerated through the bodily relationship between people in a precise socio-cultural context. For example, some scholars have presented the results of a study on how mothers with children suffering from degenerative pathologies develop a sense of care in their own bodies and through their own bodily relationship with their child within a specific cultural context. I propose to explore this perspective, which I call relational, as it is based upon a social ontology, a proper epistemology, and practical methodologies that have their fulcrum in the understanding and management of interhuman relationality. My fundamental assumption is that being a person is possible only in the relationship with the other who is different, diverse. The word relationship is on everyone's lips, scholars and ordinary people alike. However, ways of understanding what relationship really is differ greatly. There are those who treat the relationship as a variable or factor derived from subjective states of mind. Many people say I have a good relation means that I have good sentiments, but this doesn't mean that the relationship as such is good. They do not understand the sui generis reality of the relationships and the internal dynamics of relations in caring for the other. And there are also those who try to fix objective typologies and taxonomies of relationships that run the risk of reifying relationships. Unlike all these approaches, I propose a generalized theory of the relationship, which, unlike positivists, seeks to understand the qualities and causal properties of the relationship between the caregiver and the care receiver in its own sui generis reality by entering into the relationship and showing its internal dynamism so as to be able to identify the peculiarities of every relationship, particularly in the case of new forms of disability. The perspective I am speaking of is justified by the fact that it is social relations that constitute the human person in her identity. In fact, people are subjects who generate relationships, but at the same time, they are generated by relationships with others. Care is a relationship in this sense. It affects the caregiver, formal or informal, and the care receiver at the same time. St. Thomas talks about three orders of reality: the reality according to substance, the reality according to accidents, contingency, and the order of reality of relations, which is different, distinct, and real in respect to substance and accidents. The originality of the relational perspective consists in the fact that it considers care not only as an expression of the commitment of individuals as such, nor as the result of an efficient organization of services, but above all, as a way of living interpersonal relationships when ego meets an alter in need of help. What is needed by the fragile or disabled person is a solidary network of people in her life work. Personal commitment of ego and efficient organization of services are necessary, but not sufficient requisites to carry out a care for the other that can be qualified as a good practice. In order to achieve this, the relationship between caregiver and care for must have a sui generis form and content of solidarity, empathy, and competent skills. At the basis of this perspective, there is a fundamental ontological and epistemological assumption according to which it is the relationship with the context that expresses and at the same time constitutes the person, considered together with all her needs. Each person defines and enters into the relationship in a certain way, with a certain identity, and leaves it with another identity. Care is a relationship that changes the people involved. Care is a gift to the other, and the gift is, first of all, the relationship itself and what lies into the relationship. I will consider care as a relational service that creates relational goods, but this is not only in informal social help, but also in formal healthcare systems. I don't want to trace the difference between relational and non-relational services in much details. Of course, a relational service requires an interpersonal commitment between people. Non-relational services, on the other hand, are those given without the need for a relational involvement with the recipient. For instance, bonuses, economic benefits given administratively by public or private bodies, or help entrusted to machines, for instance, robots. Humanizing care means giving priority to relational services over non-relational ones, because authentic and effective social inclusion requires the construction of a social fabric. How can we rethink the formal and informal organization of care for disabled people? What I want to underline is that taking care of the other and taking care of the relationship with the other are not the same thing. The WHO, for instance, talks about the individual and its ability to act and participate in social life, but does not speak about relation as a basic factor for health. The variables used by the WHO are the individual and the collective, but what it lacks really, what it lacks is the relational layer. When we talk about the common good, as Stefano Zamagni did, we talk about relationality. Public is a collective which does not imply a relationship, does not imply a real social relationality. I can cite many different models that can realize the perspective I am proposing now. I will mention only two: the care model and the relational service model. The care model bases the care relationship on four principles: connecting with the person, the disabled person, understanding, ensuring, strengthening the relationship between caregiver and care receiver. The core of this model lies in understanding care as a dialogue that gives space to the subjectivity of the person in difficulty, reassuring her about the situation and promoting the continuity of the relationship that gives trust, with a plan centered on enhancing the abilities of the disabled person. The reference is to the professional caregiver, but in many respects, it also applies to the informal one. Now, the model of the relational service model defines disability as a relational fact generated by relationships and which must be addressed with services based on suitable relationships. The quality of the service is given by taking the perspective of the whole, in the sense that care is understood as taking charge of the person in the complex of her human condition, and therefore in the complex of the relationships she has in her life work. The characteristics of the person in need are not considered deviations, but differential qualities that require a specific thematization. Pathology should be thought of as an existential experience. I conclude by saying that in my presentation, I will argue at the plenary, I will argue that in order to humanize care, a relational bioethics is required. Taking care of the other always implies an ethical dimension. Bioethics, born in the Anglo-Saxon context, remains a mixture of biology and individual-oriented ethics. To my mind, current bioethics is called to become relational because human life is equal to good relationality, and therefore bioethic training consists in thinking and acting on human life as a social relationship. When we talk about care, the reference model is often the purely medical healthcare centered on the individual, while what we need is a model of integral ecology. Assistance to disabled people is a paradigmatic field of the need for an ethically sensitive relational approach, because the problem of the autonomy of the disabled person cannot be solved by focusing directly on her individual abilities, but by creating an appropriate relational context that can support her abilities and the opportunities for a good life. Care ethics should be conjugated with virtue ethics. It is necessary that bioethical training and the ethics of care both become training in thinking and acting according to virtuous relationships. This is so because in taking care of the other, it is life itself as a virtuous relationship with others and with the world that is called into request. Only such a relational view can guarantee an ethics of care that is humanizing rather than dehumanizing. Thank you for your attention.